Welcome to So That Reminds Me, Reminder Publishing's bi-weekly podcast discussing Western Mass news. My name is Tyler Garnet.
And I'm Chris Maza.
And we'll be your hosts on today's episode. On this week's episode, we are sitting down with State Senator Jake Oliveira to discuss everything going on in his district, as well as whether they are working on in the legislature. Chris, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty excited for this episode. Well, actually, full transparency. We did record the episode already, but going into it, I was excited. I know this is something he mentioned to us back when we interviewed him briefly at the sheriff's picnic of him wanting to be a guest. And, he was a big advocate of the podcast. So I'm interested to pick his brain a little bit.
Yeah, I thought that it was a great and really insightful conversation. Mm-hmm. I think that certainly he's got his opinions and he's not afraid to wear them on his sleeve. So sure. I certainly appreciate that. Mm-hmm. In our role as journalists, a lot of times you can find people can be a bit standoffish, but whether it's in this realm or out there in public, you'll find that is not Jake Oliveira, that he's very personable and he's very knowledgeable and just very, very friendly, nice guy. And, if you see him out, he's very willing to take the time. He takes the responsibility of being someone for his constituents very seriously.
Yeah, and definitely very knowledgeable. I know we talk about a lot of different topics in the podcast. A lot of things are kind of laid out for the listeners in Western Massachusetts. Hopefully any questions you guys had, you'll get to learn from him. And, kind of a little bit of a spoiler, we do ask him about his favorite ice cream spot in Western Massachusetts or even in the state, because he does travel all across it. And that's something that the Reminder newsroom did, reviewing ice cream. So we were glad to get his take as well.
Yeah, it's funny sitting here with Jake Oliveira. I'm feeling a little old because I remember when he was, the young upstart.
Sure, yeah.
I was working long enough ago to kind of be at least cognizant of, if not covering, his a bit of his career path. When it started, not so much when it was in the school committee in Ludlow, but when he started making the move towards the state level, so it's, this is one of those moments. There are times when I'm in this newsroom and, there are some younger members of the staff like yourself. So, and then you look at I'm realizing that I'm with the old guys now. And not to say that Jake Oliveira is old, but he doesn't seem to age yet. I do on an exponential basis. I think that maybe he's not aging and I'm aging twice for the both of us. But anyway, we'll get right into this discussion right after these brief messages.
We get it. You're busy, but you want to be connected to your local community. If you're not reading The Reminder, Western Mass's free weekly newspaper, you're missing out on the heartbeat of your town. Stay in the loop with all the latest buzz, from local stories to community updates and exciting events. It's all in The Reminder. Just log on to thereminder.com and dive into the hometown news you love. To subscribe to receive The Reminder at your home, call 413-788-1316. Don't miss a beat. Your town, your stories, your community for over 60 years. The Reminder. We are hometown news.
Every month, Reminder Publishing's Go Local magazine features the best Western Mass and Northern Connecticut businesses. With articles on new storefronts, coffee shops, restaurants, and more, Go Local magazine is your resource to find the best businesses to frequent in the area. Go Local also features original recipes, how-to pages on festive crafts, a listing of places to go, and experiences to enjoy over the course of the month, and so much more. Pick up Go Local magazine at hundreds of businesses, banks, gas stations, and restaurants all over Western Mass and Northern Connecticut, or check out Go Local magazine at thereminder.com.
All right. Well, we are here with State Senator Jake Oliveira. Jake, thank you very much for joining us today.
Happy to be here, and it's nice to see you in this facility in East Longmeadow in my district, even though you cover and report a pretty wide net here in Western Massachusetts. It's nice to have you in my district.
Well, for those of the listeners who are not entirely familiar with you, why don't you give a little bit of your background and who actually comprises your district?
Yeah, I'll start first with kind of the district, and it's officially named the Hampden, Hampshire, and Worcester District. And state senate districts, unlike rep districts, which just have one county, state senate districts, if you touch a county, they're going to put it in the name of the district. So my district comprises of about 175,000 people. I am across 12 communities, 10 in full, 2 in part, stretching everything from South Hadley to Granby, Belchertown, my hometown of Ludlow, Palmer, Warren, Massachusetts, which is my one Worcester County town that puts the Worcester in the name, Wilbraham, Hampden, East Longmeadow in full, and certain sections in Springfield and in Chicopee. So I have about 1/8 of the population of the city of Springfield. I say I always have the leafy parts of the city, so Forest Park is in my district, both golf courses, and so kind of up and down Allen Street and part of Sumner Ave is in my district. But to describe it would be hard to do because you'd need a boat, a train, and some hiking boots to actually straddle the line of it. And then in the city of Chicopee, I have about 1/3 of the population, but the bulk of the land area, because I do have Westover Air Force Base in my district, and the areas on both sides of Memorial Drive north of the Chicopee River. So the districts that we represent are roughly equal in size. I partner in Springfield with Senator Gomez, and in Chicopee with Senator Gomez, and with Senator Vilas for one precinct, yes, in Chicopee. Chicopee is very well represented. Even though it's only 60,000 people, they have 3 state representatives and 3 state senators that represent the city. They actually had 4 state reps before redistricting. So this district, which was prior to me represented by Eric Lesser, was a little bit different. South Hadley wasn't in his district. Palmer wasn't in his district. Warren, he had more of Springfield and Chicopee to give that population boost. But through redistricting, they added those 3 communities and reduced the populations of Springfield and in Chicopee in the district. But by way of background, my hometown is Ludlow. I'm 4 generations. My great-grandparents immigrated to Western Massachusetts in the late 1800s and early 20th centuries from Portugal and Poland. They mostly worked in the mill buildings that dot the riverways here in Western Massachusetts. So it's nice that it's kind of come full circle, and now I can utilize my role to invest in those mills and bring them back to life for the original reason why my great-grandparents settled here in the Pioneer Valley. I'm a graduate of Ludlow High School, went on to Framingham State University, where I earned a bachelor's degree in government, and I started my career working as a legislative aide in the State House with now a colleague of mine in the State Senate and the chair of our Ways and Means Committee, State Senator Mike Roderick, who I worked when he was a member of the House. And for 12 years after that, I worked for our state university system, working in government relations. So I spent a lot of time on Beacon Hill working to ensure that students across Massachusetts have access to high-quality, affordable public higher education. While I was doing that, I also spent 12 years on the school committee in Ludlow and 4 years in our representative town meeting form of government. So I was actually first elected 20 years ago this past March. So I'm only 39, so 20 years in an elected office is kind of like a lifetime. But prior to joining the Senate, I served 1 term in the House of Representatives representing Ludlow, parts of Belchertown, parts of Springfield, and parts of Chicopee, some of which I have in my district today. So I think being a member of the House certainly prepares you to be a member of the Senate, which obviously is a larger body, larger staff. But when when you're a new House member, all you got is one legislative aide who's trying to learn alongside of you. So no matter what role is in my state Senate office, I've probably done it, whether it's constituent services, filing legislation, managing social media and press releases that our comms teams do in our offices now. It really gives you an appreciation for everybody that you work with when you have that opportunity to serve in the House before joining the Senate. So just thank you again for being here. And I've always enjoyed the reminder because in my district, it covers many of the communities that we represent. And some of the best reporting on local government as a recovering local elected official comes from our weekly publications that really show up at school committee meetings, show up at select board meetings, town councils, city councils. And it's the way that people access information about their local government. So I've always enjoyed getting the reminder and reading it and finding out what's going on at the local level, because a lot of times we can't sit on our computers every day and watch a 3-hour long select board meeting, but we can get the highlights through the reminder. So thank you for educating us about what's going on in our communities.
I think we've got a new promo. Should we?
I think so. Yeah. No, appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
One thing before we get into anything specific, one of the things as you were talking about the scope of your district, it's really interesting because you have urban centers and also some suburban and rural areas. So while there are common threads in terms of some needs, you also have some very stark differences in both interests and needs versus someone who's living in Springfield or a business that's located there versus someone who's in Warren.
That's for sure. Every community is unique, and that's what you learn very quickly. Every community has its own flavor. They have their own politics. They have their own interests, and it's great to, have the local government experience because you can talk to a select board member or a town administrator or a school superintendent or a school committee member about their community and those individual needs. And it makes it challenging because I don't have a population center in my district. The largest community of population in my district is my hometown of Ludlow with 21,000 people, which only represents for me a little over 12% of my district. If you look at any of the other senators in Massachusetts, they tend to have a population center that is larger than all the rest of the other communities, usually represents 20 or 30 or 40% of their district. And in some cases, like Senator Gomez in Springfield, 60% of his district is Springfield. I don't have that. I have a very diffused district. And even though Ludlow is the largest, South Hadley, Longmeadow, Belchertown, Wilbraham, East Longmeadow are all roughly around the same size in population as the town of Ludlow. So I don't have that population center that's necessary that many other state senators have, but it also adds into a lot of diversity, which allows me to be, I think, an effective legislator because I can understand the urban issues that places like Springfield and Chicopee are facing. I can understand the suburban issues that places like East Longmeadow and Longmeadow really gravitate towards in Wilbraham. And I can also understand the rural issues in places like Hamden or Warren or Granby. Just this past winter, I was asked to ceremonially tap the first maple tree that the Mass Department of Agricultural Resources does a kickoff every year, and it happened to be a family-run maple syrup farm in Warren. So I get to dive into agricultural issues, and I'm proud that I'm on the agricultural committee in the legislature this session, but also a member of the Gateway Cities Caucus that represents places like Springfield, Chicopee, Holyoke, Fitchburg, Worcester, those kind of areas, urban centers outside of Boston. So it makes me, I think, become very, very in tune with the politics and the needs of different communities.
All right, so
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah.
I was just like, wait, we didn't talk about who's going to start.
Yeah, you're all good there. But you mentioned obviously lots of different things you do as an elected official. I mean, you've had many years of service in different roles. But I'm sure many people will agree one of the most maybe challenging but could be rewarding things is dealing with the state budget. So that's one of the questions we wanted to talk about first. We noted here that it's the earliest budget agreement in about a decade. But
over a decade.
Over
I
a
think
decade.
Close to a decade and a half now.
Gotcha. We were being generous then. But, we were just curious, what are your views on some of the key takeaways in terms of benefits and challenges, specifically for Western Massachusetts?
Yeah, and the budget is not just a document that includes numbers, but it includes a lot of policy priorities as well. So, the $62 billion state budget was just shy of $62 billion this year, closer to 61. But I always ask whether I'm talking to school groups or with, members of the public, what do you think the state spends the most money on? And I'll get a lot of answers like education or transportation or roads or benefits. The number one area that we spend our money on, and this cuts across every state, is healthcare. And healthcare is taking more and more of the pie and chunk of the state budget each and every year. Massachusetts has the benefit of being the number one state in the country for healthcare, but it comes at a cost. And there are also significant federal dollars that flow into the state budget to help with those healthcare costs. Massachusetts was the first state to provide universal healthcare to every resident back in 2007, 2008, and we've expanded that over time. But we've also looked at trying to contain costs. Unfortunately, our revenue isn't growing as fast as healthcare costs are growing. I think this past year we were looking at a 9.5% increase in healthcare costs that are certainly passed on to our states, our municipalities, our employers here in Massachusetts. And so finding ways to try to contain those costs is something that's essential, because that 55% of the budget continues to crowd out all the other priorities that we want to invest in, like our public schools, like our roads, like our bridges, like our highways, like our public transportation systems, like East-West Rail. All of those things require state investment, and when healthcare continues to take more and more of the pie, it becomes very challenging. But healthcare is also a major part of our industry in Western Massachusetts. The largest single employer in my district is Bay State Health by far, with over 5,100 employees that live in the Hamden, Hampshire, and Worcester district. And then the second largest employer in my district is the University of Massachusetts. So healthcare and education are really the areas that, the state plays a real significant role in. And I think this FY26 budget really built on some of those things to try to invest in areas that drive our employment cycle, but also improve the quality of life. Last year through our FY25 budget, and we carried it on this year and even expanded it, was Universal Community College, providing access to every student, every child in Massachusetts, every young adult, so they don't have to go into crippling debt in order to get a certificate or an associate's degree, or even just a course that they might need in order for their employment. You can now get that at Springfield Technical Community College. You can get that at HCC. Last year when we did it for degree granting programs. This year, in this year's budget, we expanded it to part-time programs and certificate programs well beyond it. We also invested in this year's budget significantly in regional transportation and regional transportation equity. PVTA is free for users now. And so many people, particularly low-income folks, rely on PVTA to get from work, to get to doctor's appointments, to get to the grocery store, to get their kids to school, which is part of the system here as well. That was all invested in significantly in this budget. We also did things to help out veterans. We closed a loophole for Gold Star families, and Gold Star families are families who have lost a loved one in the armed services. And prior to this year's budget, if you were a Gold Star spouse and you lost your spouse fighting and serving our nation, if you remarried, you were ineligible to get to the annuity. We closed that loophole and said that even if you remarry, you can still get the annuity from the loved one that you were married to if they lost their lives in service to our nation. So there were many things within this budget that we tried to do. We made historic investments in K through 12 education, which is through the form of Chapter 78. We're in year 5 of year 7 of the Student Opportunity Act, which has been a game changer for places like Springfield and Chicopee, which has allowed the Springfield Public Schools to be the first school system in the entire state to provide universal pre-K to every child. That was a Student Opportunity Act, but we know it doesn't work for every district. And that gets back to your question about different communities that I represent. Student Opportunity Act did not benefit a lot of suburban and rural communities. But what we did do with this budget is we did pass language that restarts the commission that looks at revising this funding formula. So communities like East Longmeadow, Hamden, Wilbraham, Longmeadow, South Hadley, Granby can get the changes to that funding formula necessary so they don't have to go to the voters locally through an override in order to fund their schools. And so I think the inclusion of that language within this annual appropriations was a game changer and will lead to greater funding later on. We also invested in some of the cost drivers for education to try to reduce costs, including special education, which is also outpacing regular inflation rates and cost containment measures there. So we invested that in this budget as well.
Yeah, sounded like a lot of benefits, obviously challenges along the way. And we also were wondering, how challenging was it to plan and develop this budget with uncertainty surrounding certain federal funding and revenue? I know I've talked to a lot of communities for different stories of earmarks being pulled or federal funding being cut. So, I was just wondering how challenging it was for the Senate and House of Reps to put this budget together.
It was extraordinarily challenging. I sit on the Ways and Means Committee on the Senate side that developed our version of the budget this past spring, and everything was a challenge when you don't have a reliable partner in the federal government, especially in the White House, but also a complicit Congress, not our representatives in Massachusetts who are continuing to fight for resources for our region and for New England in general. But it's very challenging when you're trying to plan when you see cuts being announced to so many different groups of individuals, whether it's veterans and the challenges even at the VA and Northampton and cutbacks there and how that affects people getting the health care that they deserve and earned as a veteran, whether it's our farmers that are getting the rug pulled out from right underneath them. I have a farm in Granby, Red Fire Farm, that had a horrible tragedy last year where their barn was burnt down. Federal government stepped in to try to help some of these small farmers that are already facing the increased pressures of weather-related incidents being exacerbated by climate change and wiping out their produce through things like floods and extreme weather, already facing these challenges, and to have the federal government rip grants away from them to even rebuild their barn that they were promised to get funding for and reimbursed for over time, affecting veterans, affecting farmers, and obviously healthcare. When we talk about that 55% of the state budget being spent on healthcare and this big, ugly bill that was passed that is going to be cutting Medicaid funding. Just as an example, out of our $62 billion budget, about $14 billion of it is Medicaid reimbursements coming from the federal government to the states so we can afford our Medicaid program. This is a massive challenge when you begin to tinker with Medicaid because nearly 2 million of our 7 million Massachusetts residents rely on Medicaid. And half of that population are children. So as the federal government begins to pull back resources towards Medicaid, it puts states like Massachusetts in an extraordinarily difficult position to budget because you don't have a reliable federal partner anymore. I just met earlier today with folks over at Bay State Health, my largest employer, as I said before, and I asked them, what does this ugly bill do for your bottom line? And they're 71% funded by Medicare and Medicaid as a hospital, and they're expecting close to an annual $30 to possibly $50 million cut in their Medicaid coming to places like Bay State, which not only affects the quality of health care that we have in Western Massachusetts, but also impacts our economy, given that they're one of the largest employers. If they lose $30 to $50 million a year, that means people's jobs. That means the quality of our health care. Not to mention all the grants that are being ripped away from school districts. Mm-hmm. We're going through an exercise right now by asking every superintendent of schools in our district how much you have in Title III and Title IV grants that are now being ripped away by the Department of Education and their closure. Mm-hmm. Places like UMass, my second largest employer, and great institutions of higher education, community colleges like STIC and HCC and Westfield State that people are employed in. They're getting grants ripped away from them. Those are real things that are impacting people on the ground here in Western Massachusetts. Unfortunately, the federal government decided to, pull the wool over people's eyes for a little bit by delaying the impact of a lot of these cuts until after the next election cycle. Mm-hmm. So they upfronted the tax cuts that are primarily benefiting millionaires and billionaires, not working class people. Sure. And those are up front, yet the painful parts of this ugly bill are going to be delayed until the next election. Mm-hmm. So we're still trying to deal with a volatile federal partner, not to mention trade issues that continue to plague our region. I went up to look at energy costs, for example. Yeah. Energy costs. We heard, and you did great reporting this past winter on people's bills that were skyrocketing for electricity. My place is all electric heat. I was paying a $600 bill this past February just to heat my place. Wow. Mm-hmm. And we rely on our partners in other countries to provide some of that electric source. I visited Canadian Hydroelectric this past winter. Tariffs with Canada will drive up energy costs to consumers that are already burdened by high costs right now. Mm-hmm. So to say that we don't have a reliable partner in the federal government, we have a federal government that is actively working against our state, our residents, and vulnerable populations. And I think it's incumbent upon us to speak up about it.
Now, you made mention of millionaires and billionaires, and one thing that, and I will readily admit, I'm on the record in a editorial earlier this year as being a bit of a skeptic when it came to the Fair Share Amendment. Not because I'm losing any sleep or shedding any tears for anybody making over $1 million, but because looking at, and also in the interest of full disclosure, as the spouse of an educator, looking at some of the challenges that school districts are facing on the local level, and especially you've mentioned the Student Opportunity Act and the shortcomings there. And basically, I felt like while there are a lot of worthy initiatives that were being funded through this, I questioned whether or not essentially we're putting performance parts on a Pinto with balding tires, and
great Pinto reference. My dad actually owned a Pinto in the 1970s and 80s.
And I know that that this year, and correct me if I'm wrong, there is more to do with the funding here that's going towards like Chapter 70 per pupil aid and helping that out. But kind of explain to me what I'm missing here. Now, certainly, like things like free community college, as far as I'm a product of community college. I value it, but when I look at, you've got districts who are having to make cuts and making cuts to even essential things like special education and trying to figure out how to make ends meet, and on this most basic level, it feels like we're putting the cart before the horse a little bit here.
Mm-hmm. Well, full disclosure as well, my dad just retired after several decades teaching in the Ludlow Public Schools. Son of a teacher, I was on the school committee for 12 years, advocated for changes to the funding formula. But it gets back to what I was saying just a few minutes ago. Healthcare continues to eat more and more of that pie of the operating budget. And so the Fair Share Amendment that the voters chose to adopt in 2022 is actually our fastest growing revenue stream in Massachusetts. And the money simply just doesn't go as far as I think all the advocates wanted. We were very conservative as a state when we were budgeting for the first year and the second year of fair share funding. And we were about $1 billion below what we actually took in revenue. And we're beginning to get that out through supplemental budgets to try to tackle things like rising special education costs that are impeding districts from actually, delivering the quality of education that they deserve to deliver and getting the resources for our educators and for our paras and for our students. But the revenue stream that we're taking in for Fair Share that is dedicated towards transportation and education, there are so many buckets within transportation and education that the money just doesn't go as far as I think a lot of people realized. Mm-hmm. So take education, for example. In education, we have our K through 12 school system, which is important, which is kind of the life backbone of our economy, but we also have public higher education, and we have needs there. We also have early childhood education, the amount that families are paying to provide a high-quality early childhood education to their children. Fair Share dollars help to boost salaries to get people into the field of early childhood education, to increase the subsidy that families get so they can actually afford to get put their kids in high quality early childhood education. That takes away from what people obviously think a lot of times as just K through 12 funding. Within transportation, look at the buckets that exist right now. Our roads and bridges are obvious, and the money that we send back to our cities and towns through the form of Chapter 90 aid, we've been, even though that pot of funds of original Chapter 90 aid has been steady at about $200 million for the last couple of decades, we've nearly doubled that with additional resources to our cities and towns for things like culverts, for things like sidewalks, for traffic signals, for other buckets that include additional funding for communities in Western Massachusetts, because the original funding formula for Chapter 90 is based on number of jobs, population, and miles of roadway. We're basing all the new funding on miles of roadway, which disproportionately helps Western Massachusetts because we can't compete with communities in the Boston area with the other two buckets, population and employment numbers. So we've been doing a lot to utilize these Fair Share amendments the best way possible so it actually has meaningful impact to the voters who approve this. And there's more work to be done there. This year's budget, we were able to bump up that number in Fair Share dollars coming back that are more realistic to the revenue we're taking in. But we also did a supplemental budget that increased funding and utilized some of those dollars for those extraordinary transportation costs that school districts are facing, and also for special education. But there's more work to be done. You realize very quickly that $2 billion that's generated by this runs out pretty quickly when you have serious needs. Mm-hmm. We're number one in healthcare. We're also number one in education. What we're not number one in is transportation. And that requires significant investments because in transportation, it's not just roads and bridges, not just regional transportation. It's a little thing in the Boston area called the MBTA that a significant population out there relies on. So money becomes stretched even thinner. What I don't want us to do with Fair Share dollars is to supplant funding. And that's an issue that I advocated against very forcefully, saying we can't just take money out of the operating budget and spend it on something else and then backfill using Fair Share dollars, because it won't have the impact that the voters deserve and voted for those funds to have through additional funding to support additional resources.
Yeah, and I'm sure the rising costs of everything does not help. I mean, this is a little different, but I remember with Chapter 90 funding as well, a community I covered, the amount they received, they said, could only really help one small street in their town, so I'm sure rising costs don't help either. But shifting gears a little bit, kind of going back to an original question I asked about federal funding and things being cut. I happened to go to a press conference maybe a month or so ago that you actually hosted along with State Rep Shirley Arriaga and Brian Ash. And it had to do with the decision from the U.S. Department of Labor and the Trump administration about pausing Job Corps programs across the country. which was including Chicopee, which is my coverage area, but I know there was a couple others in Massachusetts itself. I was wondering if you could just kind of give the listeners a little update on how that situation's going and, how that program really benefits the people it helps.
Yeah, when we were at that press conference a month ago, the federal decision from the federal lower courts hadn't come out yet, and I think I said at that press conference, these cuts to Job Corps programs are unconstitutional. They're not just wrong, they don't just impact people's lives, but they're unconstitutional. Only Congress has the power of the purse strings, not the Department of Labor or the President of the United States to pull already appropriated dollars. In Job Corps programs, there are 3 here in Massachusetts, 1 located at Westover. The Westover location provides not just education to 16 to 24-year-olds, but also provides essential housing for people who have really struggled, and Job Corps programs lift them up. They give them the housing opportunities that they need to get back on their feet. It gives them the job training programs so they can become self-sufficient. And so to cut these programs that impacts nearly about 400 students right here in Western Massachusetts, 16 to 24-year-olds, was unconscionable to me. Not to mention the roughly 170 or so employees that work at Westover Job Corps that could impact our economy in Western Massachusetts. These cuts were just completely misguided, wrong-headed, and the federal courts have agreed. They put a stay on the cuts to these programs unilaterally by the Trump administration. Federal courts said only Congress has the power of the purse strings to cut this, not the Department of Labor, not the President of the United States. So I'm glad the courts agreed. But that instilled a lot of fear in people. In fact, at the graduation, which I know reporters weren't allowed into their graduation, the graduation ceremony was quite moving. And one of the student speakers said, Westover Job Corps saved my life. He was someone who struggled with addiction issues, struggled with housing issues, struggled with a rough family life. Westover Job Corps gave him that bridge of housing that he needed. It gave him the ability to get a job and a certificate in an HVAC program that will allow him to be self-sufficient. The last thing we should be doing are cutting programs to vulnerable individuals, cutting programs to individuals who, without these programs, could end up on the streets, could end up homeless, and not be self-sufficient long-term for themselves and their families. This, coupled with another announcement that cut for our ESOL programs, English Second Language Learner programs that we have, federal government cut about $10 million to Massachusetts for that program as well. And luckily, we put in this year's budget some money aside to replace some of that federal funding to expand these programs to allow people to learn English so they can get a job. People that come from other countries, and I've seen these successful programs work at places like HCC and at STIC, and they really are, and they're going into high-need fields. We need these employees. We need these workers. And to cut these programs are not just short-sighted, but they impact people's real lives, and that's what's disheartening to see.
Yeah, no, I'm full transparency. I was not too familiar with a lot of these programs before the press conference took place, and learning everything, and especially everywhere you hear needs people to fill these trade positions. Yeah. So, to cut it was definitely an interesting move at first. So.
Yeah, I don't understand the move. I mean, they will say efficiencies and the cost of administering the program, but the cost to individuals that these programs could cut would be devastating for our region, would only add to people living in poverty, only add to homelessness in our area, and would further degrade kind of our economic opportunities for the workforce, for our employers that constantly ask for skilled employees. I chair labor and workforce development this session on the Senate side, and we are constantly meeting with employers, constantly looking at legislation that can help to grow the pipeline of workers here in Massachusetts.
And we will be right back with more after a brief message. Looking to age well and live smart? Savvy After 55 is your guide. From fitness and nutrition to staying social and engaged, Savvy has the tips to help you thrive. It's also your go-to guide for caregiving, veteran services, job training, advocacy, and more. Savvy After 55, because that's what you are, and we're here to help. And we're back with Senator Jake Oliveira. Now, one thing that you've mentioned a couple of things that the voters have voted on, like the Fair Share Amendment. One thing that the voters voted on in November 2024 was Question 1, which was involving an audit of the legislature. And this is something that obviously has been a point of contention and something that has obviously not seen much movement at this point. What is the resistance to what seems to be an opportunity for more to give people a better sense of what is happening in the State House?
Well, first of all, the legislature is audited annually. And that independent audit that is performed by an independent auditor, and that's an important, independent is the important word there, is posted on our website each and every year. And folks can go up there and see how we're spending your taxpayer dollars. You can even go on Open Checkbook and full transparency. You can see how much every person makes. You can see what is spent in the legislative line item. You can see what is spent on products. So I think this has to do less with actual spending and more to do with politics. Unfortunately, we have someone that got elected to the state auditor's position who is more interested in raising her personal profile than actually doing her job as a state auditor, unfortunately. And we've seen that play out now. And constitutional scholars, some that live right here in Western Massachusetts, one right down the road in Longmeadow, Jerry Duquette, who has testified many times, we want to comply with the spirit of the voters, which means showing our independent audit, getting it out there. We have made rules changes within the legislature to make our processes more transparent, including publishing every committee vote that we take at the committee level, including making sure that we don't bump up against the legislative calendar timeline, as we mentioned before, with things like the budget, to make the legislature's job more transparent. And I try to demystify it at every opportunity I can. However, it is unconstitutional to have an executive to tell the people's branch how to operate. And that's where I think the rub comes in with the will of the voters, which we respect and we want to abide by it. But an independent auditor is something that's very important. You can't have an executive audit the independent legislature. That's a violation of not just the U.S. Constitution, but also our state constitution. So that's why the Senate has created a committee to try to work with the state auditor, to try to come up with a solution, understanding these constitutional questions. Unfortunately, we don't have a willing partner in the state auditor who has refused now to meet with this committee, has refused to answer questions. And so it's unfortunate when the legislature is trying to comply with the will of the voters and we have a person in the executive branch, a constitutional officer, not willing to come to the table and engage in it. So I think that's where the stall has been coming right now. But I will say there is an opportunity for even the Supreme Judicial Court to weigh in on this. You know, the Supreme Judicial Court, they are the Supreme Court of Massachusetts. They can decide the constitutional questions. But if you ask any constitutional lawyer, having somebody that's in the executive branch audit the independent legislature is a violation of separations of powers. But that is why the legislature has created a committee. That is why we've been trying to work with the auditor right now to come up with a compromise in order to respect the will of the voters. Unfortunately, we're not having a dialogue, and we're battling this out in the public sphere rather than how it should be, which is respecting the will of the voters and reaching a compromise.
Another topic I wanted to bring up, call me biased, is another event I happened to attend that just took place this last Monday, was the WestCOMM Regional Dispatch Center ribbon cutting project that's been, what I learned, has been in the works for 10 plus years. Obviously, the groundbreaking was last March, but I was wondering if you could just tell the listeners a little bit about what that new center will do for the communities it serves and maybe for communities that it doesn't currently serve.
Well, the WestCOMM was actually created by the legislature in 1990 through statute, which allows WestCOMM to be an entity starting based in the city of Chicopee, but allowing other communities to buy into WestCOMM and move their emergency management systems to a much more regionalized, consolidated authority called WestCOMM. Obviously, the 5 communities that are involved with it, as well as the Sheriff's Department, which really we didn't mention much about, but the Sheriff's Department utilizes WestCOMM as well. So if you're dialing 911, you want to make sure that someone's on the other line. And if you ask any community, finding dispatchers is an extraordinary challenge. And to update the systems to meet 21st century technologies can be very expensive and costly to communities. That's why you saw the city of Chicopee taking the lead with WestCOMM and housing the facilities through the police department there, but having communities like East Longmeadow and Longmeadow and Munson and Ware that are all part of WestCOMM as well buy into the services that they are providing, because you want to have reliable dispatch servicing. You can't, in a lot of our small communities, if you're in a small town, it can be very cost prohibitive to put in the technology needed in order to operate an emergency management dispatch system like WestCOMM provides. So the investment that the city of Chicopee and the 4 other communities involved with WestCOMM in the opening of this new center is a state-of-the-art center. A center is something where they have reused space right along the Massachusetts Turnpike, invested dollars in it to be a regional dispatching center. So when you call on with an emergency, whether it's a medical emergency, a public safety emergency, you're going to have people that are trained, people with the latest technology in an area that they can access to get out to the police, fire, and EMT services, so you don't have a lag time. So I think WestCOMM is a model for Massachusetts, but it's not to diminish any of our local communities that have their own dispatcher centers as well. Ludlow invested significantly in their emergency management communication service. That's why they didn't join WestCOMM, since they had already made the investment. Other communities have as well. So reliable public safety access for dispatching services is really something you want to look at, but it's also economy of scale. More communities that buy into WestCOMM, the larger it becomes, the costs go down to the communities.
All right. Well, we've covered some serious topics here, so if you'll indulge us for a couple minutes, we had a couple of things that we'd like to ask you that are a little bit lighter.
Yes.
So
these weren't light.
We recently did an episode actually where we, as an entire staff, went out into the communities and checked out various ice cream places. And so we were wondering, do you have a go-to spot?
I have several go-to spots. I do love ice cream. I'm a New Englander through and through, and I think we have the best ice cream in the world is located right here in our backyard. We have a lot of farms and a lot of dairy farmers, which, by the way, a lot of the dairy farms in Western Mass were owned and started by Polish immigrants. The first round of Polish immigrants that came to the United States were actually dairy farmers. And so you see on farms up and down the Pioneer Valley, the skis and the and at the end of them, and that's because of that strong connection. And obviously, finding ways in order to sell your products beyond just milk and deliveries, something that a lot of these areas looked at. So I love ice cream, and I'm a traditionalist when it comes to flavors of ice cream. Sure. There are certain flavors that you can't find at every ice cream location. I will highlight, I am a huge fan of grape nut ice cream, which most people say, my grandmother likes grape nut ice cream. Call me an old soul. One of the few places that you can get grape nut ice cream locally is at Rice's in Wilbraham. So I go to Rice's to get my grape nut. I go to even, if I'm in the mood for soft served or, those types of things, Mountain View Farm over in Mountain View Drive-In in Hamden for a milkshake sometimes. Randall's Farm in Ludlow, which is where I grew up going, and I remember before it was even an ice cream. I had an ice cream parlor there, and that was just Randall's Farm before that. There are great McCrae's Farm and up in South Hadley is a great spot. Mr. Cone in Chicopee, I enjoyed on the campaign trail as a tasty treat. We also have some newer ice cream shops like Batch Ice Cream that's in Longmeadow, and as their truck goes around to various different places. I have in my far end of my district in Palmer, I have Rondo's. Let's just say they each play a role in my diet, probably too much of a role in my diet. And I also like some of the local ice cream spots. We talked about a little bit about maple syrup, Ferrandino's maple in right in Hamden. They do great maple flavored ice cream, which is also has become one of my favorite flavors, is maple cream ice cream. Absolutely delicious. They do great work there along with their maple bacon hot dogs. So the Mass Department of Agricultural Resources has a ice cream trail that is listed on their website. And I'm thinking about taking out my electric bike and doing some biking out to the ice cream locations in the district this later on this summer. Try to highlight some of the great ice cream spots that we have in many of our communities. And if I missed one, it's not. If I see an ice cream stop, I'll stop there. I'm also the same way about hot dogs as well.
Nice,
so in Granby, we just had celebrated 30 years of Cindy's Drive-In last weekend. Great ice cream as well, great hot dogs, buttered rolls, my favorite.
Awesome, yeah, and using the electric bike too for the ice cream. You work for your ice cream, which is great.
You're not working that hard with the electric assist to it.
Yeah, true. You can help out a little bit, but yeah, especially during these summer months. I mean, gotta have ice cream anytime you can. Yeah, but yeah, I think that was all the questions we had, and we appreciate you stopping by again. We wanted to just give you a moment if you had anything else you'd like to add. Maybe we didn't cover. I know we covered a bunch of different topics.
There's always areas that we can cover and dive into. A lot of the work that we do in the legislature is done at the committee level. So we just had yesterday my 5th hearing of the Labor and Workforce Development Committee. I'm chairing another hearing next week. These have to do with worker protection issues, unemployment issues, all things that we deal with on a regular basis. And there's about 350 bills before the Labor and Workforce Committee, and we're in the process of prioritizing those, reporting them out favorably, and getting them to the floor. Because I think in these trying times, without that reliable federal partner and a lot of crawlbacks we're seeing at the federal level and a lot of protections for workers, our committee's going to be pretty busy this session.
All right. Well, I guess one thing that I would like to ask is to make sure that people understand how they can get in contact with you and your office if they have questions, concerns, issues that they want to get in front of you.
We try to be as accessible as humanly possible. We hold office hours once a month in each of the 12 communities. They're listed just at senatorjakeoliveira.org. You can find them there. You can email my office at any time. It's just Jacob.Oliveira, Oliveira, at masenate.org. And our State House number is listed right on the website as well. We try to respond to any constituent who emails or calls us within 48 hours, particularly if it's a time-sensitive subject. We try to be accessible. We try to be at as many events as humanly possible. But feel free if you have an issue with state government, or if you just don't know where to turn. A lot of people, even if it's a local issue or a federal issue, they don't know where to turn. Our office can help to put you in touch with the people needed in order to resolve your issue. And so feel free to email at any time if you have an issue at all with state government and you're looking for some direction.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the time, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that wraps up another episode of So That Reminds Me. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back with another episode in a few weeks.
Thanks for listening to So That Reminds Me, produced by Western Massachusetts news source Reminder Publishing. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, find the latest news at thereminder.com, and follow Reminder Publishing on Instagram at Reminder Publishing, on X at The Reminder MA, and on Facebook. Reminder Publishing, we are hometown news.